Hi, John. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's very nice to have you. You had an eventful morning. The president went after Morning Joe, referred to you as an unknown, and then thanked himself for Fox and Friends ratings. What is it like when the president refers to you in a morning tweet?
You come to expect it at this point. You know that he's an
Sure.
avid cable news viewer. I suppose it could be worse than being called an unknown.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of it's almost high praise. You did respond to him and warn him against the dangers of self-thanking. Did you? Is that something you put a great deal of thought in, or do you just enjoy the volleying back?
Well, what I said is too much self-thanking can lead to growing hair on your hands. And what
Yeah.
that really was, Seth, was a joke about masturbation.
Oh,
Um,
right. Okay.
or as you may know by its clinical term, wanking. It was that type of joke, and that's
Gotcha,
what I was
yeah.
going for there.
You were one of the few people who's actually in the building doing your show at CNN. Is it a lonely atmosphere over there?
It is bizarre. It was especially bizarre right at the beginning. There are a few more people now than there were at the end of March and April. I would walk into Hudson Yards where we're located, and it's this big new building complex, and I was the only human there. I wouldn't see a single human being. My co-anchor, Allison Camerata, she was also there, but we would never cross paths. She would go to her own anchor closet, and I would go to my anchor closet, and we'd never see each other. And you just feel like it's end of days. You feel like you're occupying this building after a nuclear holocaust or something. It was totally strange.
And are you getting, I guess the most worrying thing to me is just finding a level of comfort with it. I can't believe how long I've been doing these shows out of the studio, and now it's strangely, in a really depressing way, feels normal. Does it feel normal for you now?
A little bit. I mean, when you were in the bigger studio, there's the whole crew, you have guests, sometimes there's, interpersonal connections and reaction. I'm used to people not laughing at my jokes, I guess. So being alone isn't that different in that sense. Yeah, I'm very focused. You go into this little anchor closet and you're very focused because you're just there all by your lonesome with your notes.
So when did you have this idea to do a documentary about the Electoral College? Was this something that predated the pandemic?
Absolutely. It was so last fall, some of these smarty pants guys like Nate Cohen, Dave Weigel, Dave Wasserman, I can't remember who exactly it was, but people started writing that Donald Trump lost the popular vote by about 3 million votes in 2016 and still won the Electoral College, but they noted that he could lose by even more this time and still win the election. He could lose by as many as 5 or 6 million votes. And I started thinking, that's a lot. Right? And that's enough that people are going to start to wonder what this is all about. And then it was right before the impeachment months and months. And during the impeachment trial, I remember thinking about the Constitution, that the guys who wrote it, they worked really hard and A for effort, but there were some things that they kind of left a little vague. And I wish they had done a little bit more filling in the blanks, like high crimes and misdemeanors. It would have been nice if they told us what those were. And I felt the same way about the Electoral College, that there's just so much there that isn't explained and isn't explicitly laid out. And there's so much more to learn that it became even more important, I think, to delve into. And then there was a Supreme Court case that came up that was just decided last month that made it a perfect vehicle to explore the Electoral College in depth.
So you obviously, you're in the news. This is the sort of thing you've followed. You've covered elections. What was the thing that was most surprising to you as you did this sort of in-depth deep dive into the Electoral College?
I have to be honest, I was blown away by how little I knew. I mean, I really felt like I knew nothing about how they came up with the idea. I knew nothing about what the law even says. And by that, I mean the Constitution. At a fundamental level, the Constitution doesn't require a presidential election. The Constitution doesn't require people like you and me and citizens and voters to actually vote for president. There's no provision that voters have to vote for president, which I just think is crazy. And I honestly, genuinely didn't know that. All the Constitution says is that the states shall select their electors, their state legislators, in the manner that they want to. They can do it however they want. Now, it so happens that over time, we now have elections that choose the electors, but it's not in the Constitution. There's nothing that protects you or my right to actually vote for president in the Constitution.
You got They Might Be Giants to record a Schoolhouse Rock style song for this. How did that come to be?
Well, so going into it, we knew that the idea of the Electoral College may not be the sexiest concept for TV. So we were trying to figure out how to jazz it up a little bit. So first, we thought Spirit Fingers, and then we thought, that. So then we thought, I guess, They Might Be Giants. Schoolhouse Rock has always for me been, the best way to explain complicated phenomena. I only know about adverbs, right, because of Schoolhouse Rock. So our producer said, let's ask They Might Be Giants. They do wonderful songs. They can write things really fast. And they jumped on it. And it took them no time to come up with an incredibly catchy jingle that lays it out perfectly.
You signal your choice, you give them your trust, but it's up to them and not up to us. We're only the voters. They are the electors.
It's incredibly catchy. I also say this as a huge They Might Be Giants fans. I don't think anyone has ever come to the conclusion that we need to sexy this up. Let's get They Might Be Giants.
I'm still living in the 90s or with young children. Either one of those.
Exactly. Once Cardi B was a hard no, and so then we went to They Might Be Giants. I think one thing that everyone is slowly coming to the same conclusion is we very likely will not be able to call the election on election night. And when I say we, I guess I mean you and your colleagues. How is this something that newsrooms are going to have to discuss at great length before the actual election night rolls around? Insofar as how do you talk about a thing that everybody will be desperate to hear the finality, but it probably won't be decided that night?
I think this is such an important thing to talk about, and we're already talking about it with each other and talking about it on TV and publicly. People need to prepare themselves for the election not to be called that Tuesday night, and that's okay. Look, we have mail-in voting, which is going to be happening at a much higher level, no matter what the president says, at a much higher level than it ever has before. And sometimes it takes time for those ballots to get in and the ballots to get counted. So traditionally, networks call the races based on exit polls and based on results coming in from key precincts. Well, none of us know how the exit polls are even going to work this time. If people don't show up to vote, it's kind of hard to do exit polling. Sometimes you can poll them if they vote absentee or by mail, but it's a much different situation. In key precincts, we just don't know how the votes are going to come in from those key precincts. So it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to call some of the races, especially if it's close that night. And people need to be ready for that. And just because it isn't called doesn't mean there's anything wrong. Doesn't mean it's fraudulent. All it means is they're still counting, and we need to wait for them to count, and that's okay.
Now, of course, I think most rational people would agree with that assessment. You will all be up against the fact that there will be one person who will very loudly be saying that it is because it's fraudulent and it is because something is wrong. And how do you, I mean, again, I guess you're all pretty well trained at dealing with a president who, basically every day calls you liars. Like, how do you prepare for that part of it? That basically the White House will be the one creating the most mistrust of the electoral process.
To be fair, he called me unknown today, not a liar. So at least I have that going for me.
He made it clear he also didn't think you were telling the truth.
A dishonest unknown. When it comes to the election, this specific case, I think we need to talk about it every day. And we need to make it as clear as possible every day about what the facts of it are. We have to make clear how much fraud there isn't in elections. There's very little fraud in elections in general, minuscule amounts of fraud in elections in general. To be completely fair, there is more mail-in fraud than in-person fraud, but it's still minuscule. It's like infinitesimal +1 when it comes to mail-in voting fraud. And in states that do it completely, like Oregon and Colorado, it's incredibly low. It's just not something that you shut the whole system down for. People need to know that. People also need to know the post office should get as much help as it can to get the ballots there. We just have to talk about it every day. And you mentioned, how do you guard against a president who's going to try to call fraud no matter what? I think we do have to be careful not to grade it on a curve also. One of the things you will hear some Democrats say, Paul Begala, who's super smart, said it on our air the other day. He goes, this is the reason why Joe Biden needs to win by a lot, so it's not in question. I think Democrats need to be careful with that because, Joe Biden doesn't need to win by a lot to be president. He needs to win by a vote or two in the electoral college.
Right.
Really, why should Joe Biden have to win by 30 million votes, but Donald Trump only have to win by 1? So I think we need to make sure that we're setting the right expectations, starting now.
I also don't know if I have that much confidence if the Democratic Party's plan is like, we got it sorted. We're just going to win by a lot. My last question for you, John, is you have two 13-year-old boys. Your show's on fairly early in the morning. Do 13-year-olds wake up at the early hour to watch their dear old dad?
No. I mean, they're actually, they don't sleep late. The sad part about it is they don't sleep late. They just get up early and then don't watch me.
That's even worse. That is worse.
They get plenty of me. They used to. We run the Bleacher Report. We run a sports segment. They used to tune in and watch the Bleacher Report. And Andy Scholes does our Bleacher Report, and they get all excited when he's on. I'm like, oh, can we meet Andy Scholes? And I'm like, I'm on TV the whole time. I'm on for 3 hours. Andy's on for like a minute and a half. They still want to meet him. So
look, I mean, they have better things to do than meet some unknown that they also live with.
A dishonest unknown that they know very well. They don't need to watch
they know very well.
on TV.
Thanks for making the time for us, John. I really appreciate it. Congrats on the doc.
Thanks so much. Great talking to you, Seth.